I thought, as did many of the investigators, that he possibly was a police officer, which would also and it would also help explain how he was so good at evading detection, evading of police. And he was also in fairly good shape. There were a couple times he was chased. He was able to outrun, hop fences, things like that.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to the Another Nobody podcast with me, your favorite nobody, Tavis Myers. Today we're going to talk about Joseph James Deangelo, also known as the Golden State Killer, or the original Night Stalker, or EAR, which was the East Area Rapist. And we're going to be talking with my dear friend Julia Cowley, who has been on the show before, and who was the FBI profiler on this case back in 2011. So, without any further ado, here's Julia. Hey, Julia, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Travis, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for coming back on. You're one of my all-time favorite guests, and I'm really excited to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I know we had talked about this in the past. Not only did you have a very big, interest in all of this crime-related stuff, but you had an interest in particular in the Golden State Killer case, which you ended up working yourself as a profiler.
Yes, I did.
Right. And that's something that I find just phenomenal because I get to talk to somebody that was actually there, and that's,
In a way, I was there, but yes, I
yeah, well,
followed the case and I had a great interest in it. So it was a bit surreal to be assigned the case to profiles. And then, I look back and I can't believe that I had that opportunity because it's what I dreamed of when I joined the FBI to do that kind of work. So I feel very fortunate that I was given the chance.
well, sure. And from our last interview, knowing, again, I know we both don't care for the word fan, but being somebody who did read up on true crime books and you probably knew more about Joseph Deangelo than most people did starting the investigation. Entering the investigation, I should say, because you were already into this sort of genre, if you will.
Yeah, in a way, I had my whole life from a very young age an intense interest in true crime, particularly serial murder, but all types of crime. Feel like, going into it, I thought I knew a lot, but when I actually analyzed this particular investigation, and I should say investigations because it crossed over, 15 jurisdictions in California, I realized how much I didn't know. And my perception of the offender, who turned out to be Joe Deangelo, was much different than what it turned out to be when after analyzing the case.
And isn't that always the way, too? You know, we
Sometimes,
always have
yes.
we always
Yes.
have our preconceived notions of, I mean, so many different things, but crimes in general because of what the media throws at us constantly, and it's very limited. We only get a small one side of the story and a very small amount of the story, and then when you're able to open up a case and really dig into it, it's just wild the amount of information that's available. So yeah, we're going to talk about Joseph James Deangelo Jr., all right, known as the Golden State Killer, known as the East Area Rapist, known as the East Bay Rapist, known as the Ransacker. What other names did he have? He had a whole bunch of names.
Original Night
The
Stalker.
original Night Stalker. I forgot that one. There you go.
Yeah, I'm sure there's other names that, and we'll get into this when we talk a little bit more. But prior to being the Visalia ransacker, I believe he was the Cordova cat burglar, which is not something I knew at the time of this analysis. Which, knowing that now and looking back, it does impact the analysis slightly. So, the more you know, the better the profile can be. But his crimes go way back in time, long before he ever committed homicide.
Yes, yes, and that's part of what we're gonna talk about. Now he, uh, officially, again, because he may have done things that we don't know about and or other different names and or in different areas, but, his official active time was 1974 to 1986, right?
Yes.
Again, and that's what we know about, alright? But, well, I guess we'll just start right in the beginning now with 1974 to 75 when he was the Visalia, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, ransacker, alright? Where he did over or at least 120 burglaries. 120 burglaries. And
Yes.
this is something that, uh, we know, um, really was a good introduction to, I guess, the forgive my vernacular, the crazy that made up Joe Deangelo.
Right. And he started even before that, but for the crimes that I analyzed, I looked at the Visalia ransacking cases because at the time that I was asked to analyze these cases, there was disagreement amongst the investigators, and they had formed this working group of all the jurisdictions so that they could all review each other's files, they could talk things out, and they would get together and have these working group meetings and share information. This was the first time this had really ever been done amongst all the different agencies that were involved. And at the time, there was some disagreement amongst these investigators as to whether the Visalia ransacking cases were related to the eventual sexual assaults and murders that occurred. Some investigators thought it was the same offender, other investigators thought it was a different offender. And the reason why that became so important, I thought it was an important question to answer when I profiled this case, is to do this linkage analysis. Was this the same offender? And that's because that gives you additional information about where he was located, behavior in the commission of these crimes. And not only that, the Visalia ransacker at the time was believed to be responsible for a homicide and during this period of time. So not only if you could link these cases together, but you could, and you identify the offender, you also identify the person who murdered a professor in Visalia by the name of Claude Snelling. And so that was an important question to answer for a whole host of reasons, beyond what I, just laid out. But I thought that was one of the most important questions. When you start to look at a case, you try to figure out, okay, what do I want to try to answer for
Yes.
investigators? And is it 100%? No, it's not 100%, but it's hopefully to help provide clarity, to provide additional investigative leads, to help have a better understanding of the offender and their crimes, and to potentially link other crimes together.
Now, do we know I've never heard of this, I'm sorry, I already forgot his last name, this professor. Did was he ever convicted of that homicide or no?
He was.
He was.
Yes.
Oh, very good. Good, good.
He
Okay.
pleaded guilty. So there was no trial. He pleaded guilty to all the homicides.
Right, I didn't know if he was one of the 13. Okay, very good. Um, then we move into the mid phase, which was 76 to 79, alright, where he became the East Area Rapist, also known as the East Bay Rapist, and sometimes called the Original Night Stalker, okay, where he committed at least 51 rapes, oftentimes involving couples, where he would tie up the men and force them to watch him rape their wives and girlfriends.
So he didn't force them to watch. He usually took the female victim to a different room to sexually assault her, but the male victim was present in the home, tied up and left in the bedroom. I believed he did that to mitigate a risk, to mitigate the potential that the male offender would try to intervene. He never indicated to the male offender that he was going to sexually assault the female victim, or to the male victim, not the male offender. And what he would say is he was taking the female victim out of the room to perhaps help him find her purse or belongings. So it was a way to mitigate the risk that the male victim would intervene. If he thought, okay, he's not going to hurt her, then he would stay still. And of course, the offender threatened. If he had weapons with him, he was very threatening. He threatened to kill them if they screamed or attempted to intervene in any way, shape, or form. He would put um, like breakables, like dishes and cups and saucers on the backs of the
I
male
was
victims. So if that they moved and they would fall off and break, he'd come back and kill them. It was a makeshift alarm system that he
yes,
had.
yes.
So,
I was actually gonna ask you about that. I wanted to confirm that he would stack
yes,
dishes up on them, and if they fidgeted around too much, they'd fall over and break.
right. And that would be his signal to come back in and kill them. That's what he threatened to do.
Yeah. Jeez. And
And
then
I
it
don't have
wasn't
any doubt he would have
right.
if necessary. He proved that he would. If he was met with non-compliance, he was extremely violent. And in a couple of cases in the beginning before he actually started to murder, when he was met with non-compliance, he escalated directly to deadly force.
Now, we have his murder time, okay, as far as what I've read anyway, from 79 to 86, where he truly graduated to becoming a serial murderer, but this now does include the professor, who did not realize happened earlier. So you did have at least one homicide under his belt. Were there any more prior to 79 that you know about?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Not that you're aware of, but he did indeed, take a plea to that one, which is interesting. So from 1979 to 1986 is when he graduated to murder, all right, and again, was now more known again as the original Night Stalker, all right,
Yes.
and, well, let's talk about that a little bit before we move on to his what got him the moniker of the Golden State Killer.
So in b but prior to graduating to murder, a couple things happened. Things went really wrong. In one case, victims escaped. He went into a home. He had separated the male victim and the female victim. The male victim got up, escaped out of the back door, the female victim. So he went after the male victim. At that time, the female victim escapes out the front door. So he's got both victims going in opposite directions. He's lost complete control. He escapes the house. He is chased by their next door neighbor who was an FBI agent. And unfortunately, the FBI agent lost him. He got in his car. He followed the offender who was on a bicycle. And so things went really wrong. And then he had another case where the male victim, as he was being bound, escaped from his bindings. He immediately shot the male victim and then he shot the female victim. There was no sexual assault. There was no ransacking. So it indicated that that happened early on in this particular offense. And so you had these things that went really wrong. He lost complete control in two different situations. And from that point on, he never left his victims alive. Now, prior to this, when the sexual assaults were going on, he began by breaking into homes where there was a single female victim. Sometimes children were present in the home as well. Then he graduated to breaking into homes where there would be a male and a female victim. And in the Sacramento area during that time, up until 79, he left the victims alive. And then you have the two cases where he loses complete control, things go completely wrong. And from that point on, he never left his victims alive. So I believe because of that loss of control, he decided this is no longer going to happen to me. I'm going to take complete control. Because prior to this, as I already mentioned, if he was met with compliance, and I'm going to say that he was pretty effective in gaining compliance through verbal threats, through physical restraints, through use of weapons. he was very good at gaining control and keeping things under control. And so he didn't have to use extreme violence. In the in the times in the couple of occasions where he was met with resistance, he did escalate. He would uh, use blunt force trauma. In one case, he put a fingernail file in the eye of a female victim. So he would escalate if met with noncompliance. So up to that point, he had really had very compliant victims. And then you have these two cases where the victims don't comply. He has to escalate directly to deadly force in one of those cases. And from then on, it was never going to happen again. And he never left any victims alive from that point on.
Right.
That
And it
we
kind of,
know of. That we know of. There could be cases out there that we just don't know about where he did leave victims alive. I don't think so. Investigators have never been able to link any other cases that I'm aware of to him.
and this, I mean, it seems, again to me, is a constant gradual climb, escalation, if you will, in his
Yes,
crimes. And again, much of it is control, anger and control related. Do you agree?
I would agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there
Power,
a
control, compensating for feelings of inadequacy, ineffectualness. I mean, you name it. He was not committing these crimes because he was confident in himself. He was committing these crimes as overcompensation for lack of confidence, for feelings of insecurity.
correct, correct. Now, although he did have all of these feelings, and from what I have read, and you may be able to confirm for me, he also did, in fact, have a very small penis. Is this true?
That is true.
That is true.
In several, I couldn't tell you how many, but the female victims described him having a very unusually small penis, and that was a consistent description. I would say not all the victims described it, but enough for me to believe that that was a genuine characteristic,
Right. So something that he obviously hated about himself and made him feel inadequate. Al-
possibly. Yes,
Although now with this fella, he did something we didn't touch on. He was a family man. He was married, right? He was married for
he was.
quite some time. I'm not sure. I don't know if I had written it down, but I believe he was married for over 30 years, if I'm not mistaken,
He
to the
was
same
married.
woman.
Yes. Yes.
And he had more than one child. Did he have
Yes.
three?
He had 3 daughters.
3 daughters, all daughters. In fact, I believe his last one was born in 1986. When his crime stopped is when his last daughter, the same year his last daughter was born. Whether that means anything or not, I have no idea. Also, for our listeners, if you didn't know, he did have a short run as a police officer in California.
Yes, he did.
He did, which may have made him uh, possibly a better criminal, just knowing how things are investigated and how things work, and certainly giving him being armed, possibly giving him more bravado that he would get away with it if caught. He could, as we say, tin their way out of it. Look, hey, I'm on the job. Okay, pal, have a nice day and get away. Quite often it goes to people's heads, as unfortunately it does on occasion. Um,
I
but
think
he,
his police training also helped him in gaining compliance. I mean, he would go into the homes, he would shine flashlights into the victim's eyes. As you know, that's a tactic to gain compliance and gain the upper hand when you're dealing with somebody. You blind them so that you can see them, but they can't see
absolutely,
you. He did that.
absolutely,
The tying of up of the victims, the use of the weapons, and the the effectiveness in which he used his weapons and the fact that he would escalate directly to deadly force and he was accurate in a high stress situation indicated to me possible formal training in firearms because as you know and we do this in the FBI, we train for up close shooting because believe it or not, you could be standing right in front of someone, you could shoot at them and you could miss them.
yes,
It's
that's right.
high stress, you don't have necessarily the best grip on your gun if you're grabbing it very quickly. So you train for that. You
Mhm.
train so that you can get to your weapon very quickly. You can shoot in an up close situation because, believe it or not, people miss in those situations. So we train for it. And the fact that he was so accurate, the fact that he reacted so quickly to non-compliance suggested to me there's some training here.
Yeah. In fact, as a side note, I don't know if you would know. Do you know what type of flashlight he carried?
I don't know.
Okay, now this might sound like an unusual question, especially to our listeners, but in my day, okay, we didn't, well, they were just coming out with the little tiny, pen-sized flashlights that were
Right.
insanely bright. But we used to carry longer, like,
Yes.
12-inch mag lights that were loaded with D batteries. And when you held them, I don't have one here for me, but you would hold your flashlight like this so the light would come out. And for people who can't see, I'm holding it so the light would shine into your eyes, but in an overhand manner, because the batteries in the back now become a baton.
Yes.
All right. And again, this is not necessarily an aggressive stance for a police officer. It's a defensive stance. I have the light in your eyes to stop you, but if you do anything, I also have a baton in my hand at the same time. And so I'm just curious if if there was any indication or if we knew if that was the stance that he took, because again, he would have learned that from his police training.
Yeah. I would suspect he defaulted to muscle memory and what he was trained to do as
Sure,
a
it makes
police
sense.
officer, but there was nothing in the reports and the statements that I read that indicated exactly how he was holding his flashlight or what stance he took. But all indications, just kind of putting everything together, suggested that he did have some kind of training. And I I thought, as did many of the investigators, that he possibly was a police officer, which would also and it would also help explain how he was so good at evading detection, evading police. And he was also in fairly good shape. There were a couple times he was chased. He was able to outrun, hop fences, things like that. So
Yes.
he was in good shape during this time that he was committing his crimes.
Now, another thing that may or may not have fallen into um, the psychological profile, but I could see how it would just in our conversation here. The feelings of inadequacy. He was fired from the police department for shoplifting.
Yes.
And shoplifting, quite often, for people who are chronic shoplifters, is not because they need something. It is a psychological need to steal to get over. All right. Again,
Yes.
it's a way of I don't know. Again, when I say get over is my vernacular, but it's a way to um, you know, make themselves happy in that quick little moment that they are
Yeah.
not inadequate in any way. They got over. They got away with
Yes.
this. And this dummy got caught. What did he have? Dog repellent and a hammer is what
Right.
he was shoplifting, and that's why he got fired from the police department for something. For I mean, at the time, what was it? $10 worth of stuff he was stealing,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
and it cost
Completely
him his career.
unnecessary. Yeah, it cost him his career, and he which is in some ways I think is a good thing
Oh,
that
absolutely.
he wasn't a police officer for longer. But yeah, it was looking back in hindsight it's 2020, you're like, "Oh, okay. There's a lot going on with this guy here."
Sure, yeah. Once you start putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, it gets very
Yeah.
interesting. Very
Yes.
interesting. Then so just to switch up on the name and where he became the Golden State Killer, a young woman named Michelle McNamara had written an article where she changed. In fact, you brought the article up because I remember the book. My wife read the book "I'll Be Gone in the Dark," which was she loved. My wife loved the book, and then of course I watched the documentary when it came out, which I thought was pretty well done. Did you like that documentary yourself?
I didn't see the documentary. I
You
did read Michelle's book though, yes.
Oh, you did. Give it a look. Give it a watch. I don't know if it's still up on Netflix or HBO, wherever it was, but they did a pretty good job with it. But, so she wrote this article in 2016, 2017, which was so popular that she made a book out of it, which then, of course, became the, uh, the documentary that I just mentioned, but she coined the name Golden State Killer. Is that correct? That she was the one that
That's
brought that name?
correct.
It was.
Yeah, because I think over the years, because he had so many different names. Well, first of all, the cases weren't all linked at the time. So he was the Visalia ransacker, then he was the East Area rapist, then he became the original Night Stalker, and it was in 2001 when they linked some of the homicides to the sexual assaults or to some of the sexual assaults. And so at that time in 2001, they realized, okay, we've got the same offender, the East Area rapist and the original Night Stalker are one and the same. So he became known as the ear or the ear-ons. It's a little clunky. And then when Michelle McNamara was doing her research, she wanted to come up with a moniker that encompassed all of his crimes and was not so confusing. And she came up with the Golden State Killer, and that's the moniker that most people know him by, and it's stuck. I still think of him as the ear,
Right.
but Golden State Killer's fine too. That's what most people know. So,
Well, it was funny. I think the original Night Stalker was the one that I seem to remember. When I
yes,
think back, I never remembered the ear, and maybe it's, again, being an East Coast guy, it might have been something that I never heard of, but I remember that there were 2 Night Stalkers. There was the Night Stalker,
yes.
which was Richard Ramirez, correct?
Richard Ramirez,
And then there was the original Night Stalker, which was, turned out to be Joe Deangelo. So,
right. And then you had the bedroom basher at one point in Southern California, I think. So you had, the number of different similar types of crimes in some ways, but
but
also
the
different.
but again,
But you have,
they weren't linked though. So these were at the time completely different characters, although the same
yes.
person, you know?
Yes, well, the bedroom basher was somebody different, but the Night Stalker, you had three different offenders, but for Joe D'Angelo, you had several different monikers for the same person.
And I can only imagine too, having different detectives, or different agents working different cases at the time, and not having this all as a joint effort, and believing that they were different people because nobody knew yet, okay? This only went on to possibly help in his success because everything was going in different directions.
Yes, I mean at that time too, crossing jurisdictions can sometimes be a problem, and especially if an MO changes or there's a great distance. I mean, from Sacramento to Los Angeles, that's quite a distance. And then you have an escalation where you had sexual assaults going on, and then you have this escalation to homicides in a completely different, I mean, while in California, completely different geographic region, and those were not connected at the time. And things today might be different, obviously, but back then they just
Well,
didn't have the same communications. They didn't have the same technology that we
there were
have
no
today.
computers, there was no email, there were none of that stuff existed back in the beginning, and I often relate it when I'm talking about the olden days, my olden days,
The olden days,
in,
right?
when we had Son of Sam. For people who are familiar with New York City, I mean, there were homicides that were happening in the Bronx that he was committing right over the bridge, literally, less than a mile away. He was killing people in Queens, and these 2 different detective squads never put it together. I mean, they did eventually, but it took, they were 5 homicides in before they realized that this guy was committing all these different homicides. And it wasn't the detective's fault. It was just that's the way it was back then, you know?
Right,
And I mean, even in my time in the 90s, just to get something done, we back to the computers were a brand new thing. To get a set of fingerprints done, you'd have to literally send them off and then go get on the train, or get in the car, go all the way down to one police plaza to retrieve this information. It would take you an entire day, where today it's literally you push 2 buttons on your computer and it comes back to you, you know?
right.
And just the
Different
time that
times.
was wasted was unbelievable, unbelievable.
It's
Let's
amazing how far we've come.
Oh, it is, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and forget about, well, we're gonna get into all the DNA and stuff like that in a minute. Let's We're going to take a quick break right now, Julia, and then we're going to back it up. We're talking about 2017. We're going to go back to 2011 because something interesting happened with this case and with you in 2011, didn't it?
It did.
All right. We'll be right back, everybody. 2 minutes. Hey, how you doing? It's me again, another nobody, Tavis Myers. And today we're going to talk whiskey. I know most of you think of me as an all-American patriotic type guy, and you are right. But when it comes to whiskey and drinking whiskey, which I do, I always go for the Irish stuff. And my choice when it comes to the Irish stuff is Powers Irish Whiskey. Established back in 1791, it's a triple distilled, oak-aged whiskey. Powers is simply magic. It also happens to be the #1 selling whiskey in Ireland, which has got to say something, because if it's good enough for the Irish, it's good enough for you. So the next time you raise a glass, fill it with Powers, and think of me, another nobody, Tavis Myers. This is a 2024 American Eagle gold coin, which I bought along with several others last year. I'm very happy to report that its value has gone up over 40% in the first year. See, I was encouraged to buy some gold by a financial advisor friend who suggested I be more diversified with my investments. She said gold and silver was a very safe place to park some money, as well as a good hedge against inflation. So I took her advice, and all I can say is I wish I had bought more, as it's been so very, very good to us so far. Now, I purchased these gold coins from the good people over at stackingboise.com, who could not have been nicer, more knowledgeable, or more helpful. Now, I'm certainly no financial expert, but I will say from experience, if you're looking to make an investment, buy yourself some gold. And some real gold that you could hold in your hand, just like this coin you see here. And if you do, then do like I did and get with the good folks over at stackingboise.com. I'm telling you, they're good people, they took good care of me, and they'll take good care of you. Again, that's stackingboise.com. And hey, tell them Tavis sent you. Hey everybody, we are back with my friend here, Julia Cowley, and we're talking about this just rotten, filthy savage, Joe Deangelo, who terrorized California for, what was the total number of years there? 12 years? 14 years in that neighborhood? Known as the Golden State Killer. So we just talked about him becoming the Golden State Killer, technically, with the article and book by Michelle McNamara, but we're going to back it up to 2011, because in 2011, this whole case took a turn in was it Sacramento Police Department or Sacramento?
The Sheriff's
The
Department,
Sheriff's
yes.
Department. Your bureau to do a new
Yes.
profile, correct?
Yes, they reached out. They had formed this working group amongst all the jurisdictions, and they thought some insight from the FBI's behavioral analysis unit might be helpful, might help clarify some things. So there was a request that came from the Sacramento FBI office, and I was assigned the case. I feel very fortunate. And it was very overwhelming, but I was also extremely excited to be able to work on it, because I had seen in 2004, there was a documentary on A&E that covered this case, or I saw it in 2004. It may have been filmed a little bit before that, but covered the case and talked about the linkage with the DNA. And I became just very fascinated by it. So I followed it. So very surreal to have the opportunity to work on it and be a part of it. A small part of it, I'll say, but still a part of it.
It's as horrific as much of the stuff is that we have done in our careers. It is still do I want to say nice, to be a part of history, especially when it's something so well known and something that yourself was already familiar with. And here you are being called in on it. It had to feel pretty good to arrive.
It did, and I felt it was intimidating. I felt a great deal of pressure because this case meant so much to the investigators, and obviously it means a lot to the family members, but it's the investigators that I'm working for,
Yes,
that I'm trying to assist, and I could see how much it meant to them. I mean, some of these investigators had been working on the case for years and years. And even in some of the meetings I attended, there were retired detectives that came back to attend these meetings because they had some knowledge, institutional knowledge of these cases. And that's how much it meant to them. So I really felt that. And I felt a um, a great deal of pressure because of that. I didn't want to let them down. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to provide some kind of insight. I mean, profiling doesn't solve cases, it doesn't identify offenders, but I wanted whatever I did to be helpful in some way. And I knew how much it meant to them. These cases meant to each and
yes,
every
yes.
one of the detectives.
Yeah, and for our listeners, so that they understand, I know you and I both get it, but a profile is again a tool to assist or enhance an investigation. You know,
Yes.
it is not the investigation at all. It's a tool to help investigators get through their investigation, you know?
Yes.
Um, and so although well, something that here's the thing, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I want to make sure I don't. I want to emphasize, okay? I can't imagine. I think it was probably a blessing and a curse getting this case. And what I mean by that, and you're going to tell me if I'm right or wrong, here you had a, unlike some cases, you had a massive amount of stuff to work with, which helps you,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And I
It
mean,
was.
you
Yeah.
have, he had over a decade's worth of crimes, just boxes and boxes and boxes of evidence and files, et cetera, et cetera. But the curse of it is that there was a massive amount of stuff to look
Oh,
through. I
yeah.
mean, literally, you had over 120 burglary cases alone to look at. Then you
Yes.
had to go through all the rape cases, which again were what, over 50 rape cases you had to look at.
Yes.
Then you had to look into the 13 homicides. And there must have been just miles of side stuff, on top of that whatever 200 different cases I just told you about. Please give us an idea, just the monumental amount of work it was when you jumped into this.
It was a lot of work because at BAU, I mean, you might have hundreds of pages dedicated to just one crime, and I'm looking at each individual crime. You can't just assume they're all related just because somebody's telling you they are. I mean,
Correct.
so you need to go through each case individually and determine. And there was one case that I did look at, and it didn't matter at all for the analysis, but I didn't think it was him. And nobody was murdered, and there actually was not a sexual assault committed, but it had been lumped in with these crimes, and I read through it, and it just didn't really fit. I don't think it was him. But like I said, it didn't really matter for the purposes of doing this profile. But I had to go through each and every one and sit down, read the files, and some of them were just hundreds of pages just in one case. So, what I try to do is kind of cut out the noise because a lot of noise can come with investigations. A lot, leads they're following, tips that don't lead anywhere, suspects. Many, many suspects were named. I try not to go down a rabbit hole of trying to fit these crimes to a particular suspect. So I'm going back to the very basics. What actually happened? What did he say? What does a crime scene look like? What were the injuries to the victims? Can we sequence the events of the crime? So really kind of go back to the very, very basics and cut out all the rest because you can go down a rabbit hole with just one particular suspect. and
Absolutely.
and there were I had a list. Well, it was given to me, but I didn't really ever reference the list, but there were like 8,000 names on it. I mean, it just shows you the extent of the investigation. 8,000 names, and Joe Deangelo was not one of those names on the list ultimately, but it was overwhelming. And really, I just started from the very beginning. And case number one, case number two, read through those files. And it got to the point where I would start reading, and the thing that made it a little bit easier for me is that this particular offender did the same thing the same way every time. So I'd start reading the victim's statements and I'd be like, this is him. There's no doubt, this is
Yes.
the same sequence. And that's something that the public wouldn't necessarily have been aware of. They knew somebody was breaking into the home, sexually assaulting victims, but he didn't know all the details of what actually occurred throughout those crimes, the interactions that the offender had with the victim or victims if there were multiple victims involved. And I would start reading. I'd be like, this is him, this is him, this is him. And then I got to a couple, I don't know, this is a little different. But it became so clear. And that made it a little easier to link things together when I was going through it. But I just started from the beginning. It took me about 6 months because I'm working other cases alongside this
Sure.
case.
Another
So I
thing
have,
people don't realize is that when you're working a case, you may have several more that you're also working at the same time.
yeah.
Okay.
And, to be fair, there was no hurry. I mean, I was trying to be efficient and get it done, but it wasn't like these were ongoing cases and it was an emergency situation. So I did have the luxury of just being able to sit down, concentrate, and really go through things very carefully. But it took me about 6 months to kind of get through everything. So I had a good working knowledge of everything and I had a preliminary profile, but ultimately, putting everything together and finalizing everything, my time working on the case ended up being about 2 years
Wow.
total. On and off again because I'm
Mhm.
working other cases as well. So it was quite a task, and
Here's a question for you, because I know sometimes, and when I say this, I'm certainly not talking bad about my brothers and sisters in all the different police departments around the world, okay? But I know quite often with police officers, when we do an investigation, whether we catch the bad guy or not, we have a good idea of what we're doing. We think we know what we're doing. We think we're onto something. Now, out of the probably dozens of police officers you probably talked to, over this investigation of your own, trying to build your own profile. Um, how many of them did you find were convinced of their leads and or were still open-minded? In other words, did many of them have blinders on and say, "Oh no, this guy got away, but we know who he is, and we're completely wrong," but we're adamant about their investigations? Does that make sense to you? Do you see where
it
I'm
does
going with
make
that?
sense.
Yeah.
And I mean, you may find this surprising, but I found the investigators that I spoke with, I didn't speak with every single one, but I had points of contact in the departments where they were all very open-minded. And I mean, we had like there were a couple of detectives that didn't think the Visalia ransackings were related, and didn't believe so until Joe D'Angelo was arrested. But that's okay. It's their investigation. It's not mine. I can only advise what I think. But even despite some disagreements, I found everyone to be very open-minded, very accepting, and welcoming to a different point of view of the offender.
Well, that's what I really like to hear that, because again, a true detective is a truth seeker. We're not looking to find guilt, we're looking to find truth, you know? And so
Yes.
I'm always happy when I hear that, in the end, they were cooperative, to say the least. So,
Yeah, they very much so.
good.
And I think at the beginning, I like to tell this story. So when I watched, I mentioned earlier the A&E special. and a detective, Larry Poole, who was in charge of the homicide investigations in Southern California. And he'd been, at the time, the detective who had been working on this case longer than anybody. And we had gone, my first meeting that I went to, we were going around the room introducing ourselves, and Larry Poole introduces himself, and then he looks over and he's like, I'll be very interested to hear what the FBI's BAU has to say. That is, if they'll give us their opinion. And he looked over at me and I said, I'll give you my opinion. I'm not afraid to tell you what I think. And he kind of looks at me, he's like, touche, kind of. And I felt like it was so surreal because I'd seen him on TV years
Yes.
before. I knew, like, this case, he was the one who probably had the most, at least in this meeting, institutional knowledge about all the investigations. It was very intimidating and stuff. And it was like, I remember that moment so well. And we ended up just talking a lot about the case, and we keep in touch to this day. But he was probably the person I felt was the most open to my profile and the behavior involved. And I think he really had a good understanding.
Cool. Again,
Yeah.
it's interesting to meet these people along the way. So,
Yeah.
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 I know I had that, on a couple of occasions where I would meet people that in our world would be, senior or famous detectives who worked big cases, and it was always exciting to shake hands with the fella that had actually done the work, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and he kind of represented to me, and I don't want to say that there were not other detectives that had just as much, um, you know, care and concern about this investigation. I worked with some great detectives, Paige Nealon in Sacramento. She's the one that was really my point of contact in getting me all of the documentation and information I needed. Ken Clark in Sacramento. I mean, there were just so many, but Larry was the first one I remember from that A&E special, and he seemed so, like, I want to say, kind of doubtful of me, and I thought, I wonder if he's had some kind of experience with the FBI that makes him think I'm not gonna be open and honest with
That's
him.
possible. Also, you might wanna do that thing to, put you on the spot to help light the fire, if you will.
It did.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, now let me ask you this now, so you're assigned to this case, alright? You're going through everything, you know? And I'm curious now, how would you know, classify him, for our listeners, how would you classify the Joe Deangelo that you're learning about? Again, you don't know who he is, but you're building this profile of this person, and you're kind of deciding who he is, and you see there certain things like uses specific knots, you know, um, things that I only recently learned that he would continue to torture his victims later on with phone calls. He would call them after the fact on occasion, and I don't know, there was a line he would use, but you know, uh,
that's been reported. Now, I will say there are a couple things, I could never confirm that those calls were him.
oh,
Some of the
interesting.
victims, and that I'm not saying they weren't, because it's something he could very well have done, but I think it's tough to prove. I mean, some of the
And
victims,
there's no physical evidence.
yeah, there's no evidence saying he actually made those calls. Some of the victims said it sounded like him. There's a call that's out there on the internet. You can find it easily where somebody left a voicemail message. It is extremely frightening, and the victim of that said it sounded like him. Now, whether he's never talked, he's never confessed to anything, he's never explained why he did what he did, or if he made these calls, all these little questions that we wonder about. But so I couldn't say for certain that he made those calls. So I didn't address it in the profile, and nobody could offer like proof it was him. But I'm not saying it's not something he wouldn't do, because oftentimes we do see people who enjoy inflicting pain on others in order to prolong their gratification. They will reach out to victims, or they'll reach out to family members and continue to kind of prolong that that gratification they get from hurting and frightening others, and that need to have power and control. So I'm not saying he didn't do it. The other thing that has been widely reported is that he wrote letters or postcards, or a card to police departments and poems. So I was able to determine from investigators that they did identify who was writing those, and it wasn't him.
Interesting.
That was reported, but it wasn't him. Again, even if we couldn't answer that question, I'm not sure it would change much, because somebody like him may very well continue to try to taunt people,
Right.
again, to prolong the the gratification and to fulfill their needs and what they get out of committing these crimes.
It just goes to show again how quite often the story we get is incorrect, which
Yeah,
more often than not, when you're reading the paper, seeing it on the news, it has nothing to do with the actual case. I hate to say that, but it's a fact.
yeah.
Now, how about as far as his terroristic actions? Like I've read where he would spend time in particular after a rape, would spend time in the house, sometimes up to as long as an hour. I
Sometimes
heard
longer.
reports,
Yes,
or longer. You say, okay, because I've heard
yes.
reports. One of the most scariest story, when one of the children were home, he had raped a woman who he had tied to the bed, and a little girl was in bed with her mother, and when the mother spoke something like, "Is he gone?" or something like that, the little girl said, "No, mommy, he's still in the corner," or something of that nature. I'm not
He
getting the
did
words right.
attack. He did attack women when children were in the home. Yes,
Yes.
it's
But
very
and and
frightening.
and then would, just to mess with their minds, hang out for a while in the house.
Yes. So what he did is what was interesting about him is that in every single case, he spent an extraordinary amount of time ransacking the home prior to any sexual assault.
Mhm.
So every single case. And there was one case where he took a victim out of the home, which was unusual, tied her to a tree, attempted to sexually assault her, but ended up not sexually assaulting her. He stands up, he says, "This isn't working." He kicks her and he runs off. So to me, I thought that means that this ransacking is really important part of this whole
Mm,
process. And
yes.
if he is not able to ransack, it doesn't give him the same gratification that it would if he's able to ransack. So that, and what we've learned over the years, and something that this case really hit home to me, is that there is a strong correlation between sexual aggression and burglary. And he was a sexual burglar. So, meaning he got sexual gratification by going into people's houses, by occupying their space, by letting them know he was occupying their space. He
Yes.
wasn't quiet about it. He wasn't stealthy. He was opening cabinets and drawers and slamming them. He was mumbling to himself. He was pretending to, or he was at least sounding like he was gulping food and drinking their beer and eating their bread and gulping down medications and saying to, "I need a fix," like these crazy, this was not something he was doing in a very stealthy manner. He wanted people to know that he was taking over their homes. He was occupying their space. It was an extremely important part of his process. And I found every single case that he did things the same way. If he if he sexually assaulted a female victim more than one time, he would ransack in between those sexual assaults. Extremely important to him
Well, that's
to
part of
have
the
this
part of the
ransacking.
again, the control, but the psychological terror too, that,
Yes,
you have to sit through this the whole time wondering what's gonna happen to me next. While
yes,
he's destroying your home, flipping things upside down, you're bound, tied to the bed, tied up on the floor, wherever you may be, and you just have to live through this. Has gotta be, oh, just torture. Just
yeah.
torture.
And there are more than one way. You can torture people physically, but you can also torture them psychologically.
Yeah.
And this is what he did. And he didn't necessarily need to be overly violent. When, like, one victim even described the actual sexual assault as gentle. So if you were compliant, like physically compliant with him, then you didn't end up getting physically harmed. Or I guess, like hit or punched or anything like that. I don't want to minimize the harm, but he had the control because he tortured them in a different way.
Awful guy. Awful guy.
Yeah.
Now, did you find, did I ask this already? I don't know. Did you find this, these behaviors, this signature? Now, when you were pulling the 3 different again, we had these 6 different characters who all turned out to be Joe Deangelo. Did I ask you already if you found that signature to go through all the way through,
Yes, I did.
time and
And you
time
didn't
again?
ask me that.
Yes, right.
No, but yes, I did. And looking back at the burglaries, so what was interesting about the burglaries is that, at the time when they first began, they were just nuisance kind of. He was going in on unoccupied homes during the day and ransacking and stealing things that weren't necessarily of financial value. And so you might in some of the reports, there were just a few lines, but what I started to see is, this ransacking was really important and it was very intensive. And he would do things like steal one earring from a pair of earrings. And you saw that. And I also saw that in the burglaries up in Sacramento when he was committing sexual assault. So you saw these different elements, the ransacking itself, and then the behavior that was involved in those ransackings. Um, and not only that, the makeshift alarm systems, he would put cups and saucers on the doorknobs of these homes when he was ransacking as
Mhm.
well. So, kind of a very similar and specific alarm system, makeshift alarm system that he set up that you saw across these crimes. And so, I thought definitely, well, I don't want to say 100%, you can never say 100%, but I was pretty convinced that the Visalia ransacker was the East Area rapist, just looking at them. And the one thing I will point out, which I think is really important, is that the descriptions of the Visalia ransacker were very different from the descriptions of the East Area rapist.
Really?
And very different, and which is what made a lot of investigators think that they are not the same person. In fact, they relied heavily on these descriptions. And that just goes to show you
Yes, and enlighten us on the differences.
weight. The
Okay.
Visalia ransacker looked much bigger than the East Area rapist as he was described. Now, the one thing I want to point out is that I do think when I was going through the cases, in the Visalia ransacking cases, there was one person who I thought got a pretty good look at the ransacker. And there was also, he shot at a police officer. It was one of his last, if not his last crime in Visalia. He shot at him. He had a description from this police officer. So I thought they actually saw the offender.
Mhm.
Now, when you look at the East Area rapist case, you had people describing him. Now, the victims, they never saw his face. He wore a mask. And, he blinded them with a flashlight and he put a blindfold on them. So nobody ever really got a good look at him. The descriptions that were given were of witnesses who saw maybe somebody strange in the neighborhood. So we don't know for certain that that was actually the East Area rapist. So, but those descriptions, he looked much thinner in the composites. I mean, all the composites were very different. And what Larry Poole likes to say, the best one I had was the one with the mask. That was about
Yes.
as good as we could come up with. But it just goes to show you how eyewitness descriptions can vary. They are not reliable. And so I thought, I cannot rule him out. When I'm looking at this behavior that's so similar, I cannot rule him out just because the descriptions don't match.
So, landed there in 2011, you worked on this for a couple of years, okay?
Yes.
In the end, what were you able to hand over, if you can share, to the investigators? What kind of package and profile did you give them? What insights can you have that they didn't have before?
So, and I want to say some of them had these insights, others had different opinions about it. But generally, I think the biggest insight that I offered was just the fact that he was overcompensating. And I wrote down a few notes. So, what he was trying to portray when he was committing these crimes and the image he was trying to project were very different than who I thought he really was. And I talk about a lot overcompensating. So, for example, I thought, his image he was trying to project powerful. Well, I feel that he was really insecure. Bold. Really, he's very fearful. Intimidating. He's intimidated. He tried to be macho. Thought he might be less than macho. He wanted to portray himself as sexually powerful when he was really sexually inadequate. He wanted to appear like he was tough and admired. He was superior and condescending, but he's really more of an outcast. He's inferior. He's resentful of people. So everything he tried to portray in these crimes and the way he committed them and what he verbally said to victims, I thought was the exact opposite of who he was. I thought again, I think one of the major things was that he had some kind of formal firearms training. Many people thought that he would have been in the military, and that's why he was moving around to the different jurisdictions, because they were close to military bases. But when I was kind of looking at the geographic range, I mean, there's military bases all over California,
Yes.
and
Yes.
so it's like you could live anywhere in California and be somewhat close to a military base. The other thing that, when you're looking at how he was trying to portray himself versus who he really was, there was a huge military theme going on. Like, he would tell victims that he was in the military. He would say, "Oh, I saw you at the military base."
Yes, I saw
He
that.
he wore military clothing, like he had some military type of boots. And so I thought, he does so much to try to hide his identity. Why would he give them a piece of information that could actually lead to his identity or lead to him being identified? So I thought he was unlikely to have been in the military during the commission of his crimes. And because I thought he was a little bit younger. Now, in my profile, I gave a wide age range. And I always thought, oh, I missed the age range. But I actually captured the age range. But to be fair, I thought he was going to be younger than he was. I thought the Visalia cases were, his first cases.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. He didn't commit a homicide, well, except for possibly the professor, which I did not know about before.
Yes.
But the other dozen homicides, he was already 30 or in his 30s
Yes.
when the homicides
Yes.
began. So,
Yeah. And, the average age for like serial killers is like, I think it's about 28 years old when
yes,
they kind of commit. So,
he was just
but
kind of on
I
the higher
thought,
end.
yeah, I thought the Visalia ransacker, I mean, this is just my own, I guess, bias as opposed to what went into a formal report. But I thought he's probably in high school when he's committing the Visalia ransacking. That turned out not to be true. He's much older. Come to find out, years later, you had the burglaries up in Northern California. It's called this. The offender was known as the Cordova cat burglar. He's widely now believed to have been Joe Deangelo. So his burglaries actually started earlier. So
Yes.
that's how, profiling works. And you can only go based on the information that you have. So I thought, based on his age, he would have been too young to have been in the military at all. And it turned out he had been in the military. I thought he would have had a strong interest in the military, maybe even, submitted his name to be to join the military, but I don't think he had served. Now that turned out to be inaccurate. He had been in the military. And as you mentioned, he had been a police officer. I thought he could have been a police officer. I think he fit the age range. I thought he could have law enforcement training and even have been a police officer at some point in time. And so those are the parts of the profile that I gave. I didn't feel that I thought every lead should be followed, even people who are in the military at the time of these crimes, but I didn't want it to be the focus
Correct.
because I
Yeah.
didn't think he would have been in the military while he was committing these crimes, because I don't think he would have said he was in the military, because that would have led to his possible identification. So, and he wasn't in the military during the time he was committing his crimes.
Well, again, is you know something maybe a lot of our listeners don't always understand is that it's just such a wide dearth of stuff that you have to work with, and it's never ever going to be 100% accurate. There's no way that's possible. But you do feel that you fell pretty close to who Joe D'Angelo ended up being in the end, didn't you?
I think that it was very accurate, and like you said, we had, despite not knowing about the Cordova cat burglar cases, we had a lot of information to work with. We had all these victim
I,
statements.
let-
It
I,
was incredible.
Again, I want people to understand, okay, and I'm gonna paint you in a heroic light here, okay? Although I know you were a small cog in the entire investigation, but just to let people know again how much work can go into these things, into these investigations. I mean, a simple, I don't want to say a simple or small time homicide by any means, because they're all incredibly serious business, okay? But in comparison, I mean, you must have read not thousands, possibly tens of thousands of pieces of paper in the
Yes,
end.
it was. I think it was maybe around 15,000. That's an estimate.
15,000.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'll say some of them were, 1 or 2 lines on a page or somebody's picture,
No,
but it
but it
was
was quite
thousands of
but again, when
documents.
you
Yeah.
read these, it's not just reading them. Yes, some of them you immediately get to discard, but some of them you really have to dig into and read repeatedly, and again, build a profile out of, again, what did I say? 20 burglaries, 13 homicides, 50 rapes, 50 plus rapes. That's a lot of work, Julia. And I just
Yeah.
want people to really realize the heroic effort that you made, in putting that all together, because I can't imagine having to read 15,000 pieces of paper.
Well, I don't know, heroic. I appreciate that. I don't feel that way at all. It was my job, and I felt
Well, as all of us
really
do.
fortunate to be able to
Yeah.
do it as opposed to, "Oh, I'm a hero in any no
Well,
way."
let me rephrase that,
But
because
thank
personally
you.
personally, I don't like that word hero myself either, but let's say a Herculean effort. How's that?
It was a lot. It was a lot, but I as we talked about when I was on your show before. I mean, this work fascinates me.
Mhm.
It doesn't feel like I'm doing work. I find it so interesting, and it's like I said, it doesn't feel like work sometimes. It's what I want to do, is what I was made to do, and I found going to work and working on this case and the other cases that I've gotten to work on and other things I've done in my career, I was always glad to be there. Just for the most part. There's some days where I'm like, get me out of here. But for the most part, I just, it was a dream to not only to become an FBI agent, but to have the opportunity to work in the BAU and to have the opportunity to work on some cases that, for whatever reason, became very near and dear to my heart. I mean, I don't know how many people can say that they have those opportunities. I feel so fortunate looking back that I got those chances. What can I say?
I'm gonna ask you 2 more questions, and then I'm gonna let you go, alright? Now working this case and studying, Joseph D'Angelo as you have, what did you personally learn from this case? You had to pick something up along the way that helped you in your career afterwards, yes?
Yes. I would say the number one thing that this case taught me was about sexual burglars and what that looks like, and how a lot of times crimes can be sexually motivated with no overt sexual act. I think that was a very practical lesson that I learned, and this case just brought that home to me. And going forward, looking at other cases and recognizing those signs and the correlation between sexual burglary and sexual or between burglary and sexual violence is was a key thing to me, and it helped me in other cases that I looked at along the way throughout my career.
Alright. And lastly, again, this is, of course, goes through your entire career, but working this case in particular, because it was such he is just such Geez, it's a fascinating case because it is
It
so
is.
big and so broad. But what red flags, okay, would you prioritize if you were to look at a new uh, case that was so geographically mobile? Okay, a guy that bounced all over the place like that, but also with an escalating offender. Is there something that you would say now? Oh, bang, we got to stop. We got to catch this guy now because it's going to escalate into A, B, and C. Am I making sense with that question? Because
Yeah,
I'm
I
curious.
think so.
Yeah.
Well, what I'll say, I think there's kind of two parts to that. First, just going back, a practical. If you see, this is going back to sexual burglary, if you see burglaries that seem to have a different motivation beyond financial gain, odd behaviors in burglaries, even if nobody's home, then I think there's a problem. I
Well, you know what?
think,
I want to add this right now, just because this is my brain. I'm sorry to cut you off.
mm-hmm,
The
nope,
stealing of one earring. Okay, and
yes,
you were talking, so I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm going to interrupt you now. Okay, the stealing of one earring. One, it's a memento of his crime. It's a trophy. Number two, okay, that victim still has the other earring, so it's going to continue to torture them that he only took one earring. It's going to remind them of the case, so it's a prolonged thing. There's nothing financially to gain over an
right,
individual earring. If you were to
right,
pawn them, you'd have to have two to pawn it. This is an
yes,
intentional act, okay? The trophy of taking one is the trophy, okay? But he could have had a trophy of two. No, he wants to leave the other one so it sticks in your side, and you can never forget that he was there every time you see that earring. I'm sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I think that's a perfect point. I mean, it makes no sense, but it's symbolic, it's maladaptive. I mean, that's the behavior you're looking at. I mean, obviously when someone goes into a house, they steal a pair of underwear.
Something
You
wrong with that. Yeah.
that's obvious.
Yes.
But, looking at other things that aren't as obvious. And I think that is where we can draw from the red flags early on. You may have a problem. So, when, or I should say, if a police department or an agency is investigating home invasion, sexual assaults, rather than looking for sex crimes, previous sex crimes, look for maybe a history of burglary, trespassing, peeping toms, things like that. Look for that in somebody's background versus an overt sexual act. So that's what I would say would be a practical red flag. Now, in something that's more intangible, what are the red flags here? There are a lot. We see so much going on with this particular individual, but what I will say is, how do you predict that that person is a serial killer? I don't think that you can. I wish we
Mhm.
could.
Yes.
I wish we had that ability to say who is going to act out violently and become a serial killer based on this maladaptive, odd, strange behavior, controlling behavior. If we could do that, it, we'd be able to prevent a lot of crimes. Unfortunately, we just can't do that. We can recognize characteristics, we can recognize some red flags, but to be able to predict that person is going to go on to become a serial killer, we cannot do that. So it's very challenging. And, so many people, when somebody is arrested for a crime like this, and people, us looking on, from the outside in, saying, how did people not know? How did, nobody
I know.
thinks
I
my
know.
dad, my husband, my brother, my my uncle is a serial killer, unless you're, warped like you and me. Then, like, he's probably a serial killer. You
Yeah.
make those jokes, but in all serious, like,
Yes.
nobody thinks like that, because serial killing is such a rare occurrence. The likelihood that someone is a serial killer because they have odd behaviors, you can't jump to those conclusions at all. It just statistically is not supported in any way, shape, or form. So it's impossible, I think, to predict. So that kind of answers your question in a practical way, and in a more
Yes.
less
Yes.
tangible way. I wish I had clarity in how to predict someone's going to be
Don't we all?
violent.
Don't we all? So,
Yeah.
Julia, I love having you on. You're a doll. Thank you so much for coming back, and
Thank you,
hopefully
Travis.
you'll come back and visit us again real soon.
Of course. Thank you.
Am I gonna see you at CrimeCon this May?
You are.
You are?
Yes.
Oh, all right.
I
And
will be there.
and how about what's the new one? Crime Story in October in Boston. You gonna be at that one?
I hope to be. Yes.
All
I've been
right.
invited, so
Very
I'm
good.
accepted. Yes.
Very good. All right. I look
Yeah.
forward to it. All right. Is there
I do
anything
too.
else? Where can people we didn't even mention your own podcast, The Consult. Everybody,
If
you gotta go visit Julia at The Consult podcast. She does a great,
yes.
great job with all of her guests there.
Thank you.
I think that's it. All the best, Julia. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. There you have it, everybody. Julia Cowley, one of my favorite guests. I'm so happy she was able to come back and talk to us again. You can check her out on the Consult podcast. Again, the Consult podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. It's a great show. I highly recommend you check it out. You can also see her this May at CrimeCon in person and or at this new thing called Crime Story Fest, which we're all looking forward to, is happening in October. October 9th to 11th, 2026 in Boston, Massachusetts. That's all I got for you this week, my friends. So please, please do the right thing. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button that's so important to us. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll do it all again next week. All the best, my friends. Hey, how you doing? Another nobody here, Tavis Myers. This one's going out in particular to all my drinking friends out there, because I got a new favorite thing, and it's called Shanky's Whip, and it is magical. It's Irish whiskey mixed with a little caramel, a little cream, a little vanilla, and it's heavenly. What more can I say? I suggest you pick up a bottle. You can have it as a shot with a cold beer, like I like. On the rocks, it's great. Mix it with a little cola. I promise you, you're gonna love this stuff. Next time you raise a glass, think of me, another nobody, Tavis Myers. Hey, do the right thing. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of my nonsense. All the best, my friends.
Buy our books!
Hey there, true crime fans. Let me introduce you today to the Cold Case Initiative. The Cold Case Initiative is a foundation that donates money to smaller police agencies all over the country. It does this in order to offset the costs of scientific, forensic, and DNA testing with the hope of solving cold case homicides and other horrific violent crimes that otherwise would remain unsolved. Please, if you have it in your heart and a little money to spare, go to www.coldcaseinitiative.org. Again, that's www.coldcaseinitiative.org and lend a hand where it truly is needed. Be a part of solving a cold case. Every little bit helps. Know that 100% of the donations that go to the Cold Case Initiative go to agencies that are desperately in need of the help. So please, if you can, do the right thing and make a donation. Thanks, and all the best, my friends.